if we have no problem saving 5, 10, 15% of our income into like even our 401k, which is a good thing, right? Or saving in our emergency fund and we're just piling money away, but we're giving only 2%. Okay, let's go back to the statement. What we spend money on reflects what we love and value most. Welcome to Stewardology, a podcast where two worlds collide. In this show, financial advisor Tim Russell and Pastor Drew Gysi are joined by me, producer Tyler Rutherford, to explore the intersection of financial stewardship and theology. Their unique perspectives help Christians and churches understand and apply a biblical framework for everyday financial decisions so Christians everywhere can grow in their walk with Christ through biblical stewardship. Before we get started, we just wanted you to know that the topics discussed in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations. Investment and investment strategies involve risk, including the potential loss of principal, and past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Securities and advisory services are offered through Genius Wealth Management, member FINRA, and SIPC. Without further ado, here are your hosts, Tim Russell, Drew Gysi, and Tyler Rutherford. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Stewardology Podcast. I'm Tyler, and I'm here with my co-host, Drew Gysi.
Hey there.
So, Drew, I had a conversation recently that I thought might have been a little eye-opening to me. My wife and I have currently changed up our living arrangements, as I mentioned in the last episode, in order to save money to get into the housing market, to buy a house, to expand our family, and all of that good stuff. Well, you know me, I like my goals.
And you are very good at setting and even keeping.
I like my goals, probably a little too much. But so we have our savings goal. Obviously, we're doing what we're doing currently to be able to save money. And, you know, some things come up, life happens, right? And we have a couple of times had to compromise the savings goal that we had in order to do a couple of things that we needed to do in the moment. I'm not saying go below zero for the month. I'm just saying not quite meet the savings goal that we had set.
Right.
Well, one of the members of my household came up to me and said, Tyler, do you think you're trying to save a little too much money? Like, i.e. the question is, are you choking out the rest of the family budget for the sake of this one goal? And I was like, wow. My immediate response was, no, I'm kidding. But, you know, it got me thinking. It really got me thinking, like, wow, okay, am I trying to do too much? Is a financial goal becoming an idol in my life to the point where I am neglecting other obligations in order to try to meet that goal? And I do think there's a healthy balance sometimes. Obviously, sometimes you just need to sacrifice, to grind, to get something done, right? Do it, work hard, get it done. But then you probably can take that mentality to the extreme. And I know I've been guilty of doing this from time to time, where it's you don't leave any room for anything to happen and you save what you need to save, but you neglect another responsibility because of that. And so it got me thinking about today's episode. When does a financial goal become an idol? And as we talked about this, we found that, wow, each one of our priorities that we have in our stewardship priority framework can become an idol if taken too far. And so I'm excited for today's conversation. I'm excited to zoom out and say, all right, like all of these things work well when they're in tandem together and prioritized properly. But if we take it to the extreme, negative things happen. Even with giving, think about that for a moment. It's possible to take giving to the extreme and to make it an idol. So I'm excited to get in today's conversation. Drew, how do we know when a financial or stewardship goal becomes unhealthy?
Well, I think the first thing is you're sacrificing one for another. You're choosing not to meet the needs of one of those priorities for the sake of leaning heavily onto another. So if you don't know what the priorities are, go back to episodes 3 through 7. I mean, we're going to touch on them here, but we want to encourage you, go deeper and wider so that you know those priorities. If you're a new listener, go back to those early episodes because we talk about it. That's the basis of what we do. is that priority framework. So that being said, a very important note about their priorities is they're not all equally important. A good example is that when you're in the process of getting out of debt, the luxury priority is to be less important or maybe even non-existent for some people, depending on what the debt load is.
Yeah.
And then what you put towards savings and spending. So you want to make sure that you put this piece together. So even the priority framework can be an idol, and that's an important thing.
Yeah, I think a bad word to use in our framework would be balance.
Yeah.
Balance sounds like a good thing, but if we were to balance give, save, spend, offerings, and luxuries, it probably would turn into a nightmare, right? So each one has to be worked in their proper priority, right? The first one comes first, the second one comes second, and make sure they work in tandem together to have a successful budget.
Yeah, I think if you want to go a little more full spectrum on that, Tim recently wrote a book, The Good Steward, which you can get on Amazon and other locations. But we want to encourage you to seriously consider picking up a copy, not because we're looking for book sales, but because we want you to become an even better steward. And it'll help you put this balance framework together. So if you go there, you can get that book, you can read that and get a good idea of the biblical priorities that we preach and teach, and also the balance that we talk about. But you can also go back to episode 122. We have an episode, Good Steward, Bad Christian. Synopsis, Tyler, what are we saying in that episode?
Well, first of all, if you're interested in buying the book, just check your show notes. The link is in there. Go get it. Second, Good Steward, Bad Christian. Yeah, this is the idea that you could be doing all the right things financially, but miss the heart of Jesus. 2 episodes ago, you guys talked to Michael Blue.
Yeah.
And man, that just hit a spot in my life.
I loved his heart behind things.
Yeah.
It really crystallized in a very positive way.
Yeah.
And if I was not traveling on the road, I would love to pause stuff I'm doing for 10 months and jump on board and be part of that cohort.
Yeah, so just a reminder, focus on Christ. None of this works without him. You might have a good budget, but if you don't have Christ, you have nothing. Mm-hmm. Drew, as we're talking about our categories, giving, saving, spending, offerings, and luxuries, we realize that if you put too much emphasis on one category over the others, too much emphasis, right, there can be problems. So I'm curious, is it possible to be giving heavy, giving and offerings? We're going to put giving and offerings in the same category for this conversation simply because they accomplish the same thing, generosity. But
Right.
is it possible to take generosity to the extreme, to the point where it's unhealthy?
Absolutely. There are ways to do that. And I have seen that as we've done our stewardship lifestyle seminar. I can think of a gentleman I know that was a trucker, that he was tithing, and he had his own business. He had a trucking business, and I think it was just him, maybe one other person, but he tithed off of the business income, and he also tithed off of his personal income. But he was carrying some debt that was, I will say, somewhat sustainable, like we were talking about last episode, but it was challenging, very challenging for him to give the tithe off of the business and the tithe off of his personal. And we had a good, hearty talk about this. And honestly, I looked at him, I say, pick one. At least for a season right now, pick one and give. Maybe you want to go a little bit above the tithe for the one, but for right now, to right the financial ship for you, to make things not have a poor balance sheet, jump in there and make that adjustment. I also remember a gentleman, loved the man, him and his wife, loved the church, and they made a commitment that they were going to every year increase their giving 1% to their church. Love what this couple has done, loved it. But it got to the point where it wasn't sustainable for their own personal income. I mean, they were well into the 20 percentile as they were giving. And I love the heart behind it, but the money didn't follow. the income did not follow. So it started to become an idol to give, but it became a challenge to keep the financial boat floating properly.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And especially like if you say I want to give more and give more and give more, but the rest of the pie doesn't change.
Yes.
Like you try to have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
That can cause other problems in the financial budget. And think about it, is it glorifying to God if you're giving like 20, 25%, but then you have 10% of your expenses every month going on high interest debt because you're giving too much? Well, that I'm going to use imbalance. That's the word I would use. Like that can be a problem there.
Or it may not be debt. It may be that I'm neglecting some things in the family. I may be saying, I'm not.
My kid has shoes that have holes in them and can't.
And it may not be that extreme, but it may be that you're not taking care of the family in a very good way.
In a responsible way, yeah.
Tim talks about it often, vacations, as he is on one right now. They're necessary.
Absolutely.
It's a refresh, recharge time, connection time. My wife and I are not big on it, but we do it. I think we've done more since I've been part of this team than I was when I was pastoring. Yeah. But that is, if you're neglecting a family vacation, even a simple one, if you're neglecting that so that you can give another 1% or 2% to the church, I'm all for giving to the church. I will never neglect that. That's an important piece. But the bottom line is we also have our families to take care of. So I've seen this. I've seen examples. We talked about you talked about the debt piece. I know of a gentleman, a pastor, that the church could not afford certain things, so he took out a credit card in his own name and started paying stuff on that credit card. 20 plus years later, he's still carrying that credit card and paying minimum balances on that debt, and he's not even part of that church anymore. That was a decade or more ago. Wow. And he's carrying that. I love the heart behind it, but that generosity is now turned into becoming a problem for him and a problem for his family, because every year, though he's paying the minimum every month, the interest rates are creeping that thing up to an astronomical figure.
I believe it.
And I don't see his way out unless he makes major changes on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important to think about. Giving can certainly become an idol in a number of ways, probably many ways we're not mentioning here. I mean, think about the effects of pride. I give this much to my church, and maybe you think you can drive different decisions in the church. We've talked about that on past episodes, but giving can certainly become an idol if we let that become something that's unhealthy. And I think you know that in your heart of hearts. Yeah. Like I really do think you can find that down there, but like, why do we give? Yeah. Right? Let's think about why we give. We give because God first gave.
Amen.
Right? We give because God gave us what we needed the most, and that was Christ, right? We dead in our sin, lost in sorrow, right? But God loved us enough to send us his son.
He saw what we needed the most, Christ on the cross.
Amen. And so because of that, we give, right? Yeah. That's a good thing. But what about the next category, saving? Now, saving is good. We say that you should save to provide for and protect your family.
Yes.
And stacking cash away, but maybe not giving to your church could be a problem, right? If you're putting too much weight on the saving category of the pie and you're neglecting giving, well, then that can become a problem. Or even in my case, where I mentioned in the intro of this episode, we were trying to save so much money that we were getting really stressed out over things we had no business getting stressed out over. Like, Drew laughs at me for this one. There was a situation where
go for it.
We needed gas.
Spill the truth, my friend. Spill the truth.
we really needed gas. We were waiting for the next payday, and we didn't want to take money out of savings to pay for gas. But we're like, we get paid tomorrow, honey. Let's just get there. Let's just get there to the point where we can get gas. We had already gone like 4 or 5 days without spending a dime because we were doing what we call I forget what we call it, but we were doing a week where we just don't spend any money. I kid you not, my engine light was on all the way to work one day. I had like 7 miles left in the tank.
The low fuel light, you mean, not the engine light, the check engine light.
Did I say the engine light?
Yeah, you said engine light.
I apologize. I meant the fuel light.
The low fuel light.
Yeah, that thing came on. And I swear I coasted into Wawa across the street from our work. But we made it, right? We made it. But how dumb would that have been if I would have ran out of gas on the way to work, creating bigger problems for myself?
Created more financial problems.
Amen. All because I was like, no, we need to save a certain amount of money. Like, okay, I took that category too far, clearly. But
you're now confessing that to your wife?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, she doesn't watch this show probably. I don't know if she does or not. I never ask her about it. I probably should. But anyway, savings. I think the more common thing is people probably value saving more than they value giving.
Yes.
And so a lot of what we find, probably what you find in seminars, is that their giving to saving ratio is off.
Yeah.
Maybe they're saving way too much, not being generous enough. I don't know. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, I think you got to look at the average American, since that's where we live right now. The average American gives about 2.3% of their income to charity.
Yeah.
For the believer, to the local church. 2.3. But yet they have no problem putting in 3, 5, 10% into their 401k and other things, which we are not faulting, do that. But the bottom line is we don't find that margin to say, okay, we need to do the savings, but we're not going to be generous to kingdom work, because that's the money we see in our bank account. And I see this often. I've had multiple conversations through the years where people are making a very decent income. They're doing well. They talk about how much they love their church. They're beaming when they talk about their church and the ministry. And then we look at their tax return and they're falling in the proverbial 2.3% of their generosity. And I turn to them, seeing what their income is, seeing what their assets are, seeing what's in the bank account, say, you know what? Before the end of the day today, you could cut a check for 10% of what you earned this past week and give it to your church, and you're going to be doing just fine. Mm. That becomes a wake-up call. And I actually had a woman who I shared that with, where 6 weeks later, she reached out to me and she said, thank you so much. I am so excited that not only can I talk about loving my church, I can be part of giving to my church and seeing this kingdom impact happen. You know what? She was doing great on the savings, but she was falling short, not on her love for the church, but in her love of generosity toward her church. And by just somebody challenging that in a good way, in a loving way, the whole attitude changed. And she is doing phenomenally well. She's making good financial choices. But I share that with you because we fall into that trap where we can give a token of our offerings, but yet we're so hyper-focused on the saving piece, the retirement piece, and we're seeing things out of balance. So we want to encourage you. There is a reason why Scripture says that we ought to, on that first day of the week, set aside money to give. Yeah. And we encourage, we like encouraging people. Start with that 10%. If you're not there, you can't do 10%, wonderful. Where are you at? Are you at 2.3% now? How can I encourage you between now and the end of this year to make it 4 or 4.5%? And then next year, when you build your budget out, move that needle to 6. And then keep moving that needle until you're at that 10 point. And then go above as God blesses. Because I believe that will be a major game changer for you. So as we think about some of these scriptures, what are a couple others that we can kind of put here in light of this savings and generosity?
There's one that I really enjoy. It's from 1 Timothy 6:18. It says, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. What's interesting is to be willing to share implies that I have something to share, right? And
good point.
These people were wise, right? They had reserves. Savings is a really good thing. Giving is arguably better.
Yeah. Especially to kingdom work.
Exactly. Drew, last episode we talked about how what we spend money on reflects what we love and value most. Mm-hmm. And something you said there struck me, right? If if we have no problem saving 5, 10, 15% of our income into like even our 401k, which is a good thing, right? Or saving in our emergency fund and we're just piling money away, but we're giving only 2%. Okay, let's go back to the statement. What we spend money on reflects what we love and value most. Mm-hmm. Is me overvaluing saving, saying I value me over God? That's a convicting thought.
Ouch.
Right? Yeah, that's a convicting thought. Do I value my future security? Do I value what I might want to do in the future more than I value God and his work through the church? Now, I'm not saying you have to match percentage for percentage. No. That's not what we're saying. All we're saying is principally get the priorities right.
Yeah.
Right? And have them work in tandem with one another.
Yeah, and you can't outgive God.
Amen.
You cannot outgive God. But the bottom line is, if you know you can do better, and you probably do, as I'm just saying this, then maybe it's time to do better and restructure some pieces to make sure that you can be in that generous part. But the thing is, you also need to make sure, as we're talking about in this point, this savings that you need to make sure that you find that right balance, because many people can be so generous that they're not saving, or they're saving so much that they're not generous. It goes both ways.
Yeah.
So very important.
So our third category in our framework is spend, which includes necessity spending, which in that includes the topic of debt elimination. But for this topic, for this episode, we decided to break out necessity spending and debt elimination into two different points. So Drew, talk a little bit about our first point, debt elimination.
So as we think about debt elimination, when you're refusing to make common sense spending decisions for the good of the family and that are right and necessary, also that you can build your savings, there's a problem here. So you need to work toward making sure that debt is taken care of, but not to the point where you are neglecting those other pieces. There's times where there's going to be some expenses that are appropriate to make that you can forego, i.e. taking a family on that trip or going out to eat. That's a big one, going out to eat. You can make that decision to go or not go and make the necessary adjustments to your budget, as it's very important. The couple needs to have that unity there. So debt elimination, it comes down to using some common sense to kind of eliminate, to eliminate those things. But be very careful. You can curtail certain spendings. Tyler, you talk about a food budget and trying to make the food budget. So sometimes it's good to say, okay, we are going to go slim over this next month. We're going to trim things down. Why? We want to throw another $100 at the debt. Good goal, lofty goal. It may help you shed a few pounds.
I remember what we call it now. We call it skinny week.
Skinny week. That's right.
That's when we spend absolute minimum on groceries and just figure it out as we go.
So skinny week. And that skinny week can actually come upon two different ways. Skinny on the spending and skinny on the waist, right?
Yeah, true.
But the thing is, if you can do that and do it in a healthy fashion, yes, please do that. Absolutely do that. But the bottom line is, if you're going to the point where things are too slim on the necessities, the food, because you're so hyper-focused to get another $100 to pay down debt, again, we like the hyper-focus, but we also want balance more than hyper-focus.
Yeah, this question actually came up recently with a friend of mine who asked me, hey, Tyler, I'm trying to pay down debt. Should I still give to the church?
Really?
Yeah. So this question is valid here, right? Yeah. Because he was wondering if he should value debt elimination so great to the point where maybe giving to the church isn't happening. And I pushed back on that and I said, no, you should still give to the Lord, right? Because again, what does that say about what you love and value most?
Yeah.
All of this. But this is a sneaky one, because we can think debt is so bad and I need to aggressively get rid of it to the point where you're not giving and you're probably not saving, or maybe you are, I'm not sure. But that's probably worse if you're eliminating your debt and saving it, but not giving to the church. That's so just something to think about, right? We don't want to neglect the Lord.
Right.
We certainly don't want to neglect him. We don't want to neglect our families. We do want to eliminate the debt, but remember, all of it's got to fall in the priorities. And we got to make sure we're putting the right amount of attention on each one. But there's another piece to this.
Before we go there, I want to go back to that debt piece.
Yeah.
And as I sit back and I process about giving to the church in debt, I don't think it has to be an either or.
Amen.
It needs to be an and. It needs to be a both. Yeah. And I can understand this either or mindset. But remember, I'm going to put my pastor's hat on. Remember, church, that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. He owns it all.
Amen.
He can actually take care of your needs. And we think we need to take everything into our own hands. I think if we prayerfully say, God, I want to generously give to kingdom work because I believe in the mission of my local church. I want to see people come to know Christ and grow in Christ. I'm going to do that. But Lord, please, I am planning on making wise decisions moving forward over these next weeks and months. But God, would you so supply my needs? Not just my wants, you've already done that, and I don't want to supply my wants because I want to focus on paying down the debt. But God, would you supply my needs? I want to encourage you. Jump on board. Go for an amazing, awesome ride in your life where you're aligning your finances with the Lord, with the Spirit of God, in action, in literal hands-on operation, together with the Lord, and seeing some amazing things take place in these upcoming days.
Drew, that's really good. And before we move on to the next point, like my buddy that asked me that question, do I still give while I'm getting rid of debt? That's one of the things I reminded him of was, hey, like, if you were to put all of your money into the debt repayment and not give to the Lord, what that's saying is, I think that my income right now can do more good for my situation than what God can do in my situation. Because what you're saying is, I got to do it all myself.
Yeah.
I got to put all my income, all my disposable income on this debt. And again, destroying debt is a fantastic thing. You should do it.
Get focused.
But if we're neglecting giving to the Lord, that's a problem. Because what we say when we give to God, and I feel like I've experienced this more in the last year than ever before in my life, is when we give to God, we're saying, God, I think you can do great things with my income, more than I can do with it, right? Even in my situation where I'm paying down debt, God, I trust you to do more than I can on my own.
Yeah. I like to say it this way. God can help you through the work of the Spirit and through the way that God does math. He can help you live better off of 90% than you can trying to live off of 100%.
Amen.
Again, we don't live in Old Testament days. I get that. I know that. I understand that. But in Malachi 3, it talks about robbing God by not giving to God. And God says, test me if I will not open the windows of heaven and pour out such a blessing to you. Now, I'm not talking health, wealth, prosperity gospel, but it's the only time God talks about testing and our giving to him, and that he will not just provide, but open the windows of heaven and pour out such a blessing that it cannot be contained. Again, not a health, wealth, prosperity gospel, but how God operates math. You can live better off of 90% and generosity to kingdom work than if you try to live off of 100% by yourself. That's God's math. And if you haven't lived it, give it a try. My wife and I have been doing it for many years, and we have experienced amazing blessings from the Lord, and I expect nothing less than more in the future.
So I don't know if you're catching the trend, right? As we're jumping into the second half of our spend category, necessity spending, you're finding that these categories become idols when we neglect the previous category, right? Mm-hmm. Saving becomes an idol if we're not giving, right? Maybe debt elimination becomes an idol if we're not giving and saving. So you're catching on to the trend here. So let's move into the second part of our spend category, which is necessity spending. When does necessity spending become an idol?
When you're sucking up the funds for savings and giving, and you need to pull back on your regular spending. So, you know what? I understand the days of having rice and beans today and beans and rice tomorrow, using a Dave Ramseyism. I understand those days, but I don't know whether I can go on for a year doing that.
You'll definitely lose weight.
Definitely. So many carbs with that. But the bottom line is, we need to have better nourishment. So when we're sucking up the funds for savings and giving, and we are choosing to pull back on the necessity spending, the nourishment spending, I'll say, when it comes to our food budget, or when it comes to certain clothing pieces or shoes or maintenance for a car, if you have one, that can be a challenge for us. So what are your thoughts on that, Tyler?
No, I think necessity spending, every person has a different idea of what that looks
And
like.
everybody's personal budget will have different necessity spending pieces in there.
Necessity spending as a category, I think, can become an idol, like you said, when we're not giving and saving. And let's say the biggest part of our chart, or all of it, is just necessity spending. And I think at that point, we need to go back and reevaluate what are the needs and what are the wants.
Yeah.
And I think when we go into debt, this is actually a symptom of not having a clear understanding of the needs versus wants. Because again, give first, save second, spend third, which includes debt elimination, necessity spending. And if we're improperly putting luxuries, i.e. wants, things that aren't necessary for life and limb, right? Put that into our spend category. Well, now things get out of whack because we're spending potentially hundreds of dollars on things that we don't really need, and that can cause stress. Maybe, and then again, if we work backwards through the categories and things are out of whack, our saving gets crazy out of whack. Our giving might even become non-existent if our luxury and spending categories, we just have to have all these properly aligned in order.
With some people, when I do those personal stewardship reviews, when it comes to budgeting and debt elimination and personal finances, for some people, I wind up spending a larger period of time, or a lot of time, really going through this necessity spending category and helping them to process needs versus wants, because we get so ingrained that we need, and we need to go back and we need to look at, is that really in that? You said in the beginning, properly categorize these things. We get so accustomed to our budget and how we're operating that we have to go back and say, is that absolutely needed for my and my family's survival?
Yeah.
I will say, today is one of those days where internet accessibility is almost a need for life, for educational purposes, for school purposes. You need to have your email. You need to have those different things that are there. Where I'll go back 18, 20 years ago, in the infancy of some of these things, even go back 30 years ago, it was more of a want than a need. But now our society has pivoted. Okay, I get it. So you need internet, but do we need the internet bundled with the cable, bundled with the HBO, bundled with all these other pieces, and we're spending maybe $300+ a month? Could we pull it back? And I know my daughter wound up getting internet for $50 a month. And it's sufficient for her what? Needs. Yeah. So I think it's very important that we go through and we process, do we need all these other layers? Do we need all these other pieces? And by choosing to go through and do maybe some budgetary forensics, you can actually see where you're bleeding in the need-want category and go in there and purposely pull out the wants to be able to get down to the bare minimum needs and move those wants into the proper category.
Yeah. Well, and Drew, I think this is an excellent segue into that fifth category, luxuries.
Oh, what a good segue.
Well, I think it's clear when luxuries become an idol, but at the same time, you think about, okay, if I've properly done give, save, spend offerings, And who cares what happens with luxuries? Like you might get into that. But we have to make sure, actually, before I go further, luxury spending tends to be the thing that sucks up funds from all the other categories, right?
It does.
It tends to be the thing that we mistakenly miscategorize items, like we were just saying. We think it's a need, but it's actually a want, and we tend to do all of that. But we have to be really careful with luxuries for a number of reasons. The dangers of wealth become apparent in the category of luxuries as well. So when do luxuries become an idol? When does it become an idol? I think the first point that I would have is that when it starts sucking funds away from all the other categories. It's stealing funds from giving.
Yeah.
Right. I really want a nice new boat or something. Right. So I'm going to give less.
The yearly family vacation that we always do, but it doesn't seem to fit into the budget this year. But I'm not going to forego it because we've been doing it for 22 years now. We'll just put it on the card.
Yeah, it's rough. And the thing is, like, we're stealing from the Lord in our budget. If we do that, we're taking funds away from giving. Or what if we're taking funds away from saving in order to pay for the family vacation? Well, what we're doing at that point is probably putting debt. We're going into debt for this vacation.
Exactly.
Right.
And I've seen that over and over.
Yeah. Okay.
I see people that are carrying vacation debt 10 years later.
Oh, that's wild.
On their credit card.
Yeah.
10 years and more.
Whew, I believe it. I really do. And okay, so what happens if our luxuries are stealing from our necessity spending? Well, again, we're miscategorizing needs versus wants, and if our entire budget is already full, we're probably going into debt there too.
Yeah.
And so luxuries can be particularly tricky when it comes to this as well.
It is. So one of the important things is you need to make sure that you have your luxuries spelled out in your budget. These are the things that they're a want to have, but not a need to have. They're a desire to have, but not essential for everyday life. I understand vacations. I'm not a big vacationer. I'm more of a staycationer. In fact, in a few weeks, I'll be doing a staycation to stay home. And I love to work in my garage and play with my vehicles and repair things and fix things. And yeah, I may probably spend some money on the maintenance and repairs on things that I could probably spend on a vacation and get those memories. Again, everybody does things differently. I still do a getaway with my wife. I try to do that once or a couple times a year. It could be maybe for a weekend. It could be for a week like the other year. But the bottom line is we build that into our budget. We build that into our savings throughout the year. So then when we plan to go on that trip, whether it's a weekend or a week, we have the cash to be able to pay for it. But we are not neglecting giving to the Lord. We're not neglecting savings for today and tomorrow and for the future. We're not neglecting that we have those everyday things taken care of. Now, my wife and I do not carry any debts, so we're not having to worry about putting money into that. But the bottom line is we are hitting all these other categories, and then we are stashing money away to be able to do that. Now, if we get, as we talked about in previous episodes, a sucker punch of life, that we get a medical bill or a dental bill or a car repair bill that is a little more astronomical, it's not going to cripple us because we can turn to each other and look at our budget and say, you know what, that dental bill, as much as we want to make that long vacation, maybe if we curtail it a couple days, we can still get a couple days away, but we can pay that dental bill off in full. It's trying to process that. So it's very important to be able to look at that and find those things. Remember, your budget is always dynamic. It's always going in and out. It's always moving. It's never static. The people that process their budget as static becomes more of a challenge for them because they'll say, well, I have to pay that dental bill, but I also have to have that week-long vacation. Well, do you? can you say, okay, we're going to do 4 days instead of 7 days vacation, but we're going to get that dental bill taken care of. So we still get the time away. We still get those things taken care of. So trying to find those balance pieces is a very important thing. But never, never, never go into debt for the purpose of these luxury items. And that includes my dream of a Harley. If somebody out there would like to actually purchase a Harley and have it delivered here to our office, I will gladly accept that. Thank you. Greatly appreciate that. So I don't see that happening.
Well, the stuff too is important. I know we just harped on vacations for a little bit, but the things that you purchase in the luxury category can be idols too. Like, for example, Solomon in Ecclesiastes 5 talks about all these things and they just existed to feast their eyes upon them.
Yeah.
Like, things can exist just to, like, they don't serve any functional purpose. At the same time too, what if you're into something, you're into collecting cars, cars are awesome, but you're into collecting a ton of cars, but you love them so much. You keep them clean. You polish them all the time. You keep them pristine. And it's to the point where you don't even let other people touch them or drive them or anything, simply because you're like, I'm nervous it's going to get messed up. Well, now you have a warehouse full of awesome vehicles that no one gets to enjoy because you fear losing that which you love, this luxury, these cars. An idol, exactly. This reminds me of a buddy of mine who, he's pretty well off. Like, he's a couple generations in a successful family business, and he's rather well off, and he's really into outdoor stuff. So
your kind of guy.
He's my kind of guy. One of the guys in our friend group was saying, "Hey, I'm going skeet shooting." This guy was like, "Oh, well, what do you have? Like, what do you shoot with?" I'm into this stuff too, and just my budget, Remington, not sponsored, Remington shotgun. If you want to sponsor us, let me know. Shotgun. And he goes, "Oh, you know what? Like, I have this really nice piece over here if you want to take it. And here's this, and here's this, and here's this, and here's this. If you just, go have fun with it, man. That's great. I'm glad you get to have this experience."
Wow.
And my brother borrowed like thousands of dollars of gear from my friend who's rather well off, but he's so generous with his stuff. He could have just as easily not mentioned a thing, and out of fear of having his luxury ruined, just kept his mouth shut.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But instead, he was so generous with what he has, which I think that's what God calls us to, is being generous with what you have. Be willing and ready to share. And He said, "Here, take this." He's like, "If it gets messed up, so what? It's just a thing. It's just a thing. You're a person, and I value more than just a thing."
And can I say, I so appreciate you sharing that story. My wife is the same way. She loves giving. She loves being generous. She loves sharing. I say this tongue in cheek. If I stand in a spot too long and you have a need for the shirt that's on my back, she'll rip the shirt off my back and give it to you. How I've been watching my wife and how she works, and now you just shared that story about that guy that was being very generous. I'll be honest. Years ago, I was not that person. I hang out with my wife. I see the generosity with my stuff. I say that tongue in cheek.
Stuff.
Oh, wait, that's right.
Our stuff.
But you know what? I want to be that person more and more and more. I want to have that generosity. Just the other night, my neighbor reached out, and they know I have an automotive lift in my garage, and they need to get some work done. And they said, "Hey, what's the possibility?" And they're like, "Absolutely, been waiting for you to ask. I've offered it a handful of times." So I spent an evening. We anticipated an hour, maybe doing the breaks. We spent 2 hours because we had some fun. But I was so grateful, and I wanted to share what God has blessed me with. And can I just say, that is such a great thing for us to be able to do, to be able to take what we have.
Yeah.
And I could make my tools, which I enjoy, my car lift, which I enjoy, my car, my motorcycle. I can make those things idols and not allow the enjoyment aspect to be there, not just for myself, but for others. I have some friends. Shout out to my friends in Quakertown. I was just with them last night. The one guy's going to have a car show actually on his property later on this year, and my old car was not ready to ride. It's been sitting parked for 5 years, and I just haven't had time to do any work. So I took some time off. He's there like, yeah, I want you guys to come. Well, that kind of put a spark underneath me. I need to get that car ready for that car show. So because he wants me to be able to share that, I want to be able to share it. And so I'm almost there. I just need to polish it up, but mechanically it's running great. But what it comes down to is saying, okay, what's my mindset? Am I willing to share? Like you said this earlier, Tyler. So what if it gets ruined? So what if it gets messed up? That's hard in my mind.
Yeah.
Because if I share something with somebody and I get it back damaged or broken, if it's just because it was its time to break, I get it. But if it was because of neglect and foolishness,
it's another story.
That's another story.
And it's okay to feel that way.
Yeah. But I wrestle with that, and I always think that's what's going to happen first.
Yeah.
And I need to not have that be my first mindset.
For sure, man. I feel that.
And what happens is I allow my things to become that idol instead of the grace of God of having those things bestowed upon me to be generous with that to others.
Yeah. Well, and as we close down, I think it's important to recognize that there will be seasons of life where your priorities do feel out of whack depending on your goals. Like, for example, right now, my wife and I were trying to save for a house. So naturally, we're sacrificing other elements of our budget to be able to try to make that happen. And there are healthy ways to do that and unhealthy ways to do that. And I think the majority of this episode, we've been exploring the unhealthy ways to prioritize different categories, either intentionally or unintentionally. But just know that, like, there are times in your life where debt elimination seems to be priority number one, and it might be, and you got to get that thing off your back, right? And there are times in your life where maybe you're really behind in your retirement savings, and you're closing in on retirement, or at least when it should happen, and you got to just go for saving for retirement. Like, there are times in your life where life happens and you're there and you're in the trenches and you just have to make it happen. That's okay. My wife and I like to gamify things a little bit. We gamify our savings, like when at like Skinny Week, or we try to make it a challenge. Hey, like, who can go longer without spending money? Like, and it's money on dumb things too. It's not like groceries, but it might be on like a coffee here or there, or, we're out. It's easy to just swing by like a fast food place instead of going home. Like, we'll gamify that and kind of have fun a little bit. It's like stress fun. I don't know. I got to figure out where I thrive in that. But it's something that you can do to like make it more interesting and bond with your spouse. Like when you and your wife or you and your husband, like, you sit down and you put your nose to the grindstone to accomplish a goal, it doesn't have to be all terrible and stressful. Like, you can actually make that an experience where you're bonding and like making something out of that. Because if you don't, it's easy to just be miserable. Right. And so whatever goal you have here, whatever financial goal you're working towards, we got to make sure we're working together with our spouse if you're married, and at the utmost important, honoring God with the choices that we make.
And right below that, making sure your gas light doesn't go on.
Making sure your gas light doesn't go on. Lesson learned, Drew. Lesson learned. Well, thank you for joining us today on the Stewardology Podcast. We really appreciate you tuning in and being a part of the shenanigans we got going on here. It's a lot of fun having you join us. It's a lot of fun being here and doing what we do. We thank you for listening. We couldn't do it if it wasn't for you. But until next time, remember, God bless. And there's some really great words from Ecclesiastes 5 that I mentioned earlier. It says, "Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This, too, is meaningless." Let's not make a financial or stewardship priority an idol. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us on the Stewardology Podcast, where financial stewardship and theology meet. We'd like to help you take your next steps in biblical financial stewardship. Subscribe in your podcast provider to get the newest episode delivered to you every week. Leave a 5-star rating and review to help new listeners find the show. Take advantage of your free personal stewardship review at stewardologypodcast.com/review. Be sure to follow us on social media and visit our website at stewardologypodcast.com for tons of free resources and hundreds of free episodes. You can also leave episode ideas at stewardologypodcast.com/idea. Remember, Psalm 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. See you next week.